Have you ever felt that something inside you is permanently damaged? Do you know someone who hides their mistakes, past failures, or emotional scars, as if they disqualify them from being respected? What if I told you that the very things you're ashamed of may be the foundation of real strength? In Japanese philosophy, ideas like Kintsugi and Kaizen challenge the modern obsession with flawlessness. Most people respond to pain by suppressing it, denying it, or trying to fix themselves back to an earlier version. This is where they go wrong. Suppression doesn't heal damage, it freezes it in place. The core idea of this video is transformation, not erasure. This video is dedicated to anyone who feels weakened by their imperfections. Now, back to the video. Have you ever met someone who seems to have everything under control, yet carries a quiet tension just beneath the surface? Ethan Morrell was that person. In his late 30s, he was known as dependable, composed, and relentlessly competent. Colleagues trusted him with responsibility, friends described him as steady, and from the outside, his life appeared orderly. But beneath that structure lived a constant unease, a sense that everything could collapse if he loosened his grip for even a moment. Ethan had learned early that approval followed performance. Mistakes were not lessons, they were liabilities. So he built a life around precision. He arrived early, stayed late, and anticipated problems before they appeared. Control became his currency. The more flawless he appeared, the safer he felt. Yet this safety was fragile. Any sign of weakness felt dangerous, as if it might expose something defective at his core. Vulnerability, for Ethan, was not intimacy. It was risk. He avoided difficult conversations, deflected personal questions, and kept emotional distance even from those closest to him. This wasn't arrogance or coldness. It was self-protection. If no one saw the cracks, no one could confirm his deepest fear, that he was fundamentally flawed. Philosophically, Ethan embodied a modern illusion, the belief that strength comes from appearing unbroken, but an identity built on perfection has no flexibility. It cannot absorb pressure, it can only resist it. The more Ethan tried to maintain this image, the more effort it required, and the more anxious he became about losing it. What looked like confidence from the outside was, in truth, a constant act of containment. Why is it that a single mistake can feel heavier than years of quiet competence? For Ethan, the moment came during a routine presentation, one he had rehearsed repeatedly. A miscalculation slipped through, small in consequence but visible to everyone in the room. The correction was made quickly, the meeting moved on, and no one openly criticized him. Yet inside, something fractured. What unsettled Ethan was not the error itself, but what it represented. The mask he relied on had slipped, if only briefly. In that instant his mind did not register context or proportion. It jumped straight to conclusion. If he could fail publicly, then the image of reliability he had built was false. And if that image was false, then perhaps he was too. Instead of reflecting on what happened, Ethan replayed it in isolation. He stripped the moment of nuance and turned it into evidence. This is how perfection-based identities respond to pressure. They do not adapt, they collapse inward. When worth is measured by flawlessness, error cannot be corrected. It can only be condemned. Psychologically, this response is predictable. The mind seeks consistency. If your identity is "I am competent because I do not fail," then failure threatens the entire structure. Ethan did not see a human mistake, he saw exposure. So he doubled down, working longer hours, becoming more rigid, less open to feedback. What looked like motivation was actually fear tightening its grip. The setback itself passed quickly, but the meaning Ethan assigned to it lingered. By refusing to process the experience honestly, he transformed a momentary error into a verdict on his character, reinforcing the very insecurity he was trying to outrun. Do you know how a single unresolved moment can quietly reorganize an entire life? For Ethan, the aftermath of his setback did not fade with time. Instead, it settled into a pattern, one that repeated itself with quiet precision. Shame became the starting point, not the loud dramatic kind, but a persistent inner verdict that told him he was lacking in some essential way. To escape that feeling, Ethan overcorrected. He reviewed everything obsessively, double-checked decisions that didn't need it, and pushed himself harder than before. At first this felt productive, but overcorrection is not growth, it is avoidance disguised as effort. By focusing on control, Ethan never had to sit with the discomfort of what actually happened. Eventually the strain caught up with him. Burnout crept in, subtle at first, then undeniable. His concentration thinned, his patience shortened, and the work that once gave him structure now felt heavy. Rather than recognizing this as a signal, he withdrew. Conversations became shorter. Emotional engagement felt exhausting. Distance offered temporary relief, but it also deepened his isolation. This is the suffering loop in its simplest form. Pain that is not processed demands resolution. When it is avoided, it cannot teach. Avoidance blocks learning, and without learning, the same conditions produce the same outcomes. Each repetition adds weight. What began as a single incident now felt like proof of a broader failure. The suffering persisted not because Ethan was incapable, but because nothing was integrated. Until pain is acknowledged and understood, it does not dissolve. It waits, and when it returns, it does so amplified, carrying the frustration of being ignored. Have you ever noticed how a small idea can interrupt a long-standing pattern without force or drama? Ethan's introduction to Kintsugi did not come through a book or a lecture, but through an ordinary conversation. A colleague mentioned a ceramic bowl on display at a local gallery, repaired with thin lines of gold running through its cracks. The detail lingered in Ethan's mind longer than he expected. Later, curious and slightly restless, he looked into it. Kintsugi, he learned, is the Japanese practice of repairing broken pottery by filling its fractures with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The break is not concealed, it is emphasized. The object is not returned to its original state, it becomes something new, shaped by its damage rather than diminished by it. What struck Ethan was the logic behind the practice. Kintsugi does not treat breakage as a flaw to erase, but as an event to honor. The bowl is valued not despite its cracks, but because of them. Its history becomes part of its structure. Strength is restored through integration, not denial. This idea stood in quiet opposition to everything Ethan believed about himself. He had spent years trying to appear seamless, as if any visible fracture would disqualify him. Kintsugi suggested the opposite. That repair does not mean pretending the break never happened. It means reinforcing it honestly. For the first time, Ethan considered that his efforts to hide damage might be the very thing keeping him fragile. If an object could become stronger by acknowledging where it broke, then perhaps the same principle applied to people. The thought did not resolve anything yet, but it disrupted the loop, and sometimes that disruption is where change begins. Why is it that we assume healing means going backward, as if the goal is to erase what changed us? Ethan carried this assumption with him when he first sat across from Dr. Masato Ishikawa. The office was quiet, almost sparse, and the man himself spoke with measured patience. Nothing about him felt urgent, yet nothing felt dismissive either. Ethan explained his frustration in careful terms. He spoke about wanting to feel normal again, to return to the version of himself that hadn't felt so strained or uncertain. Dr. Ishikawa listened without interruption. When Ethan finished, the doctor paused, then asked a question that unsettled him. Which version of you are you trying to restore? Dr. Ishikawa explained that this desire to return to an earlier self was common, but misplaced. In Eastern psychology, suffering is not seen as a detour from life, but as part of its development. You cannot undo what has shaped you. Only respond to it wisely. Healing, he said, is not restoration, it is adaptation. The idea challenged Ethan's core belief. He had treated his struggle as damage that needed to be removed. Dr. Ishikawa reframed it as information that needed to be integrated. Experiences alter the nervous system, perception, and priorities. Trying to become who you were before those changes only creates resistance. This shift was subtle but profound. If healing meant adapting, then Ethan's goal was not to erase his cracks, but to reinforce them. Dr. Ishikawa was not offering comfort through reassurance, but through clarity. Growth would not come from pretending the break never happened. It would come from learning how to live differently because it did. Have you ever wondered why your body reacts before your mind has time to decide? Dr. Ishikawa explained to Ethan that this was not weakness, but adaptation. When a person experiences repeated stress or emotional injury, the nervous system learns from it. It reorganizes around protection. Attention narrows, control increases, and uncertainty begins to feel unsafe. He explained it simply. Trauma is not just a memory of what happened. It is a pattern of anticipation. The body prepares for danger even when none is present. If that adaptation is ignored or dismissed, the system has no reason to stand down. It remains in defense mode, scanning for threat, tightening around mistakes, reacting quickly and rigidly. This is where denial becomes costly. When someone tells themselves they should be over it, the nervous system hears the opposite. It hears that the danger was never resolved. Avoidance prevents processing, and without processing, the body continues to behave as if the threat is ongoing. Dr. Ishikawa returned to Kintsugi, this time not as art, but as principle. Integration, he said, is what allows the system to relax. When an experience is acknowledged, examined, and given meaning, the nervous system updates. Fear decreases because the past is no longer treated as unfinished business. Denial works in reverse. By hiding damage, you reinforce its power. The system stays alert, guarding a wound that was never allowed to heal properly. Integration does not erase pain, but it changes how the body relates to it. For Ethan, this explanation removed the mystery from his reactions. His rigidity was not a flaw in character. It was a protective pattern waiting to be understood and reorganized. Do you know how difficult it is to act differently when old patterns still feel safer? Ethan learned quickly that understanding integration was easier than practicing it. The real work began in ordinary moments, when he felt the familiar urge to tighten control or hide an error before anyone noticed. Instead of reacting immediately, he started to pause. When he made a mistake, he acknowledged it without explanation or self-punishment. When he felt overwhelmed, he admitted his limits rather than pushing through in silence. These changes were small, almost unimpressive, but they disrupted the automatic responses that had kept him stuck. Dr. Ishikawa described this approach through the lens of Kaizen, the philosophy of gradual improvement. Lasting change does not come from dramatic reinvention. It comes from consistent, manageable adjustments repeated over time. Each small act of honesty taught Ethan's nervous system that exposure did not lead to disaster. Slowly, the need for constant defense began to soften. There were moments when his instincts pulled him back toward overcorrection. In those moments, he practiced responding instead of reacting. Response created space for choice. Reaction only repeated the past. The difference was subtle, but cumulative. Kaizen reframed progress for Ethan. He no longer measured growth by how flawless he appeared, but by how quickly he noticed and adjusted his behavior. Strength, he learned, was not intensity, it was sustainability. These daily practices did not eliminate discomfort, but they changed his relationship to it. Each small integration made the system more flexible, more resilient. Over time, those small shifts added up, building a form of stability that no longer depended on perfection. Why is it that progress feels most fragile when we need it the most? For Ethan, the first real test came during a period of sustained pressure. Deadlines tightened, expectations rose, and the familiar tension returned to his body before he fully noticed it. Old habits resurfaced quietly. His inner dialogue sharpened. His patience thinned. Emotional withdrawal began to feel efficient again. At first, Ethan interpreted this regression as proof that nothing had truly changed. The self-criticism came quickly, carrying the same harsh tone he thought he had left behind. When he brought this to Dr. Ishikawa, expecting disappointment, he was met instead with calm recognition. Dr. Ishikawa explained that relapse is not a reversal of progress, but information about the limits of the current system. Under stress, the nervous system defaults to what is familiar, not what is ideal. This does not mean integration failed, it means it is still incomplete. Progress that allows no imperfection is simply another form of perfectionism. Philosophically, this reframing was essential. Growth is not a straight ascent. It is a process of exposure, adjustment, and repetition. Each regression reveals where more attention is needed. Without pressure, weaknesses remain hidden. Stress does not create the problem, it reveals it. Ethan began to see these moments differently. Instead of collapsing into judgment, he treated them as signals. Where did the system tighten? What triggered the shutdown? This shift transformed relapse from a verdict into a guide. By allowing imperfection within progress, Ethan reduced the fear of failure itself, and in that space, real resilience began to take root. Have you ever noticed how perspective changes once you stop fighting your own history? For Ethan, the shift was gradual, almost quiet. There was no single breakthrough moment. Instead, he began to see patterns that had been invisible before. Situations that once overwhelmed him now revealed subtle emotional cues, both in himself and in others. He started to recognize that his past struggles had trained his attention. Years of tension had made him sensitive to changes in tone, posture, and mood. What he once labeled as overthinking revealed itself as awareness. What he called weakness showed itself as emotional range. The pain had not improved his life by existing, but by being processed. Dr. Ishikawa clarified the distinction carefully. Suffering does not automatically create growth. Unexamined pain narrows perception and breeds fear. But pain that is understood expands capacity. It forces the mind to reorganize, to become more nuanced, more patient, more precise in how it interprets experience. Cause leads to effect, but only when the process is completed. This understanding changed how Ethan viewed himself. He no longer saw his history as a series of defects to overcome. He saw it as training that had sharpened his judgment and deepened his empathy. The goal was not to romanticize hardship, but to recognize its informational value once integrated. By reframing his past in this way, Ethan loosened the last grip of shame. His identity became less brittle, more dimensional. He was no longer defined by what he lacked, but by what he had learned to carry. In that shift, strength stopped feeling forced and began to feel earned. Do you know how real change often announces itself quietly, without drama or celebration? Ethan did not wake up one morning feeling transformed. Instead, the evidence appeared in small, observable ways. Conversations felt less guarded. He listened without rehearsing responses. When tension arose, he stayed present rather than withdrawing. At work, his pace shifted. He still cared deeply about quality, but urgency no longer governed every decision. He delegated when needed, asked for clarification without embarrassment, and corrected mistakes without spiraling. The frantic edge that once drove him softened, replaced by steadiness. Productivity did not disappear. It became sustainable. His anxiety followed the same pattern. It did not vanish, but it lost its authority. Where it once dictated behavior, it now served as information. He noticed it earlier, responded more thoughtfully, and recovered more quickly. The nervous system, no longer locked in constant defense, began to trust its own resilience. Philosophically, this was strength made visible, not rigidity, but flexibility. Not flawlessness, but honesty. Ethan's life improved because it no longer depended on maintaining an image. When pressure arrived, there was room to adapt. When mistakes occurred, they did not threaten his identity. This kind of strength does not impress at first glance. It lacks drama, but it endures. It allows for rest without collapse and effort without self-erasure. Ethan's progress confirmed the central teaching. Resilience is not the absence of cracks, but the ability to carry them without fear. In that quiet competence, a deeper stability finally took hold. Why does clarity often arrive only after complexity has been lived through? By the time Ethan could see the system clearly, it no longer felt theoretical. It felt practical, grounded in experience. What once seemed abstract now followed a simple, repeatable logic. The first step was acknowledgement. Damage could no longer be denied or minimized. What happened mattered because it changed how his mind and body responded to the world. From there came understanding. Instead of judging his reactions, he learned to observe their cause. Anxiety, control, and withdrawal were not random flaws, but adaptive responses formed under pressure. Integration followed naturally. Rather than hiding these patterns, Ethan worked with them consciously. He allowed past experiences to inform present choices instead of quietly dictating them. This reduced internal conflict. The system no longer fought itself. Gradual improvement anchored everything. Kaizen made change sustainable. Small adjustments, practiced consistently, rewired behavior without overwhelming the nervous system. Progress was measured by responsiveness, not perfection. Setbacks were no longer treated as contradictions. They were expected. Stress revealed what still needed attention, not what had failed. This removed the urgency to be flawless and replaced it with patience. Kintsugi provided the mindset. Damage could be incorporated rather than erased. Psychology explained the mechanism. The nervous system relaxed when experience was integrated. Practice delivered results through repetition, not insight alone. This system did not promise a life without difficulty. It offered something more realistic, a way to meet difficulty without breaking. For Ethan, simplicity was not the absence of depth. It was the result of understanding it. Do you know how much energy it takes to pretend you were never changed by what you lived through? Most people spend years resisting their own history, believing that strength means returning to an untouched version of themselves. But imperfection is not what weakens you. Resistance is. Ethan's journey points to a quieter truth. You are not meant to erase your cracks. You are meant to reinforce them. What breaks you open also reveals where growth is possible. When damage is denied, it controls you from the shadows. When it is acknowledged, understood, and integrated, it becomes part of your structure. This is not about celebrating pain or seeking hardship. It is about honesty. Life leaves marks. Experiences reshape perception, behavior, and capacity. Pretending otherwise only fragments the self. Integration, on the other hand, creates coherence. It allows you to move forward without carrying a hidden war inside. Real strength is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the ability to remain present with it. It is flexibility under pressure, clarity during uncertainty, and patience with your own process. You do not need to be flawless to be grounded. You need to be real. So take a moment and reflect. Where are you still hiding your cracks? Where are you trying to appear unbroken, instead of becoming reinforced? That question, asked honestly, is often the beginning of change. If this reflection resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you value long-form philosophy grounded in real life, consider subscribing. We'll continue exploring these ideas together, calmly, thoughtfully, and without pretending that growth is ever perfect.